Today on the Bioinformatics CRO podcast, I'm joined by Dr. Eric Green, Chief Medical Officer at Illumina. Eric has spent decades at the center of modern genomics with a career that spans the Human Genome Project, more than 3 decades at NHGRI, and 15 years leading that institute as director. At Illumina, he now helps guide global efforts around clinical genomics, access to precision medicine, and the diversity of genomic data. We're going to talk about what he's doing in this chapter, how his path unfolded, and what advice he has for people building at the intersection of biology, computation, and medicine. Eric, welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here, and it's wonderful to talk to you again.
We're very excited to have you. So how would you describe what you're doing now, both day-to-day and at a high level?
Let's start at a high level to say that I'm only completing my 3rd month here as not only as Illumina's Chief Medical Officer, but it's only my 3rd month working in the private sector. I have a long career, first started in academia and then nearly 32 years in the government, and now only 3 months in not only the private sector, but then specifically at Illumina. At a high level, Illumina is absolutely at the forefront of efforts to try to see genomics have maximal positive impact on the practice of medicine. Something fundamental to how I got in genomics in the first place, and certainly a centerpiece of my efforts while at the National Human Genome Research Institute, in particular when I was the director for 15 years. And so when they approached me, which really wasn't that many months ago, after I retired from federal service a year ago, listening to their ideas about how they want to morph themselves from being a very technology-oriented company to being a solutions application-oriented company, and particularly in the arena of genomic medicine implementation, it was like music to my ears. And so at a very high level, I now get to have the honor of serving as a chief medical officer of what I think is the premier genomics company that really offers the greatest promise to really push the envelope by bringing their technology, their expertise into an arena that is primed and ripe and ready to see genomics truly make an impact on patients' life and improve human health. Now, that is a very high level statement. I will also tell you, which is the day-to-day part is more difficult, is the other really wonderful part of this job is I'm going to craft it. Illumina has had chief medical officers in the past, but they were at different times. It was, a while ago was their first, and then the last one that was here hasn't been here for 3 years. And it's just a different moment in time for so many reasons. And so one of the other great things about this opportunity is really being given a big block of wet clay that I've now started to mold it to see what the things are that I think we should immediately be working on. But I am quite certain that even 6 months from now, when maybe I have a better day-to-day understanding of what I do, I bet you 2 years from now, it'll even be different than that, because I think this is a very fast-changing, very dynamic area. And to some extent, I may have ideas, but the more I learn about Illumina, I might even change my approach to what I suggest that they do or how I help them formulate their strategic priorities in terms of genomic medicine implementation.
What does the field look like from your seat right now that most people don't see from theirs?
Well, I can tell you that 16 years ago, which is I think about the time that I became the director of NHGRI, and the big push I made as becoming the new director was that I thought, and this was around 2010, that I thought the time was right to get serious about investing in research to guide the way on how genomics is going to be used in the practice of medicine. And we did this in a fashion where we weren't being overly scripted and saying, all right, first we're going to integrate it here, and then we're going to integrate it there. But rather, we let a bunch of flowers bloom and invest where you can in terms of research dollars from the NIH and see what happens. But there was a lot of skepticism. If you go back 16 years, I can tell you that not everybody thought the time was right. The big difference now versus then is that we proved that absolutely the time was right. And starting 8 years ago, 5 years ago, what area you're talking about, nobody questions the fact now that cancer genomics is real, that the use of genomics as part of cancer diagnostics, as part of cancer therapeutic development, et cetera, it's absolutely going to be more and more mainstream. It's still early days, but nobody questions it's going to be real. Nobody questions anymore the idea that that genomics is now a frontline diagnostic tool in helping patients who have rare genetic diseases. It's just routine. And in fact, it's finding more and more niche uses in that area, including in acutely ill settings, such as intensive care units, where, especially in the neonatal period and even the pediatric period, there's even some evidence that might be relevant in the adult ICU setting, where patients have come in with undiagnosed rare diseases. If you could rapidly sequence their genome, you can change their medical management. Nobody would have been convinced that was going to be the case 15 years ago. It's absolutely mainstream now. Or take an area like prenatal genetic testing, where now non-invasive methods are used millions and millions of times for pregnant individuals around the world. And these tests are not very expensive. They're increasingly being covered by insurance. And it's now mainstream that you offer to pregnant individuals non-invasive genetic testing using very powerful new technologies, some developed and refined by Illumina and others that have built on those same kind of technologies and adapted them in other ways. So these are just the early examples, but there's more coming, and there's a lot of excitement around pharmacogenomics. There's a lot of excitement even around prevention and thinking about more and more that we can learn things, and maybe we learn it earlier and earlier in life that may help improve how patients are medically managed, which is why what I've gotten very excited about over the last 2 to 3 years is the seriousness that many countries are taking in studying the idea of sequencing the genomes of all newborns to expand upon the well-established genetic screening that goes on in most countries for some modest number of rare genetic diseases, and building on that to say, wow, why are we limiting ourselves to just a handful of diseases? Why don't we just get comprehensive genomic blueprint information that we can action around, and even more than what we're currently doing. And yet we know that in the coming decades, we'll even figure out more and more ways to make these things actionable. And so there's lots of studies, multiple ones in the US and dozens around the world.
So you gave several examples of incredible applications of genomics that are being rolled out at scale now. What are some areas of genomics that have stayed stubbornly hard, where maybe they didn't meet people's expectations from some years ago?
The most obvious area to go to stubbornly, well, there's two kinds of stubbornly hard, actually. I mean, maybe that's the first thing we should do, is if you say, what are the stubbornly hard barriers to genomic medicine implementation? I would immediately bifurcate and tell you two different bins. One is biological and medical complexity, and two is society and the complexities of healthcare. I think we always should be separating those. Not that one is easy and one is hard. It's just that we should recognize some of this is because biology is really complicated and physiology and pathophysiology is really complicated. And unraveling that, yes, technically we can generate immense amounts of data and about things that hopefully will one day give us biological insights about it. But getting those insights is still hard. And then we need to separate that from health. Healthcare is just so complicated in every country in the world. And we are now in a circumstance where we are trying to bring a significant change to healthcare by the use of genomic information. And we're running into all of the usual challenges that come with any change in healthcare. So if you want, we can talk about both separately, but let me focus on the biological complexities. The fact is, if we go back 23 years when the Human Genome Project ended, we knew we had a challenge ahead of us in terms of actually interpreting the 3 billion letters roughly that we had ordered. And we knew it was going to take probably multiple generations to fully interpret it. But I think a lot of thought at that time was, all right, we'll get this inventory of the many tens of thousands of genes we have. And then when we sequence this and lots of people, we'll find lots of mutations in the genes that'll tell us a lot about human disease. And what's transpired in the last 23 years? First of all, we learned that we only have 20,000 genes, not that many more than worms and flies. So human complexity does not come in our gene count. And then we learned that, holy cow, there's all this non-coding DNA, which is, in many cases, in many areas, incredibly conserved through evolution, which was immediately signaling to us that means it's biologically important, because otherwise evolution would have gotten rid of it. And it's in the part of the genome that we don't have the knowledge of the language. We don't really know how to read out, like the way we can read out the codon table to understand the coding parts of the genome. And then the more we keep studying these things, we also realize, wait a second, there's an awful lot of reasons to believe that genomic variants are living out in these non-coding regions, and that these are the genomic variants that when we do these fancy human genetic studies are the ones that seem to be statistically associated with some of the most common diseases that we need to completely tackle and understand and eventually be able to make predictions about, make better treatments for diabetes and hypertension and cardiovascular disease and so forth. And one of the big challenges that remain is learning about the biology and the medical consequences of genomic variation that exists outside of coding regions. And there's every reason to believe that there's an immense amount of medically important, hopefully medically actionable variation out there, but we've got to define it, we've got to understand it, we've got to mechanistically characterize it, and that's really hard. And we're getting better at it. There's lots of exciting things that are being done. And at some point, you may want to ask me about AI, because it seems that everybody will always ask the questions about, no matter what the topic in the world is these days, you always say, how is AI going to influence it? And of course, I do think AI is going to have a considerable influence on helping our human brains understand all the intricacies of genome function. And once again, I want to stress that over the last 23 years since the Genome Project ended, as we realized that our complexity, a lot of it lies outside of our coding regions. Thank goodness we've had brilliant scientists discover all the different ways that RNA is biologically important and all the different subtypes of RNA and all the craziness of, we're learning more and more about RNA modification. We already knew about RNA splicing and alternate splice forms, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and of course, then there's epigenomics. And thank goodness that the technologies for sequencing DNA have become increasingly adaptable to study epigenomic modifications. And there we are. So, all these technologies are just lining up really nice. Oh, and the other variable, of course, if we're sort of saying what are the big barriers is, I know what I learned in medical school. I learned about the kidney, and I learned about subparts of the kidney. But the fact of the matter is, even the subcomponents of the kidney, we label them with one name. But of course, they have multiple cells within it, and not every one of those cells is behaving the same. And so there's just a lot of biology at the single cell level. And fortunately, we're getting technologies to be able to study all these complicated things about omics, as we would often say, and doing it at a single cell level. There's a lot of great science to be done. And I will say, and maybe this is an important point to really make, is I do think sometimes when people talk about precision medicine and genomic medicine and multi-omics of human health, I think sometimes people think, and they hear it from people like me and others who are very excited about it, and we love to point out the home runs because we love to demonstrate that, wow, this really can change clinical management. But I think occasionally people might, and especially younger people, trainees, might get the impression that everything proximal to that has been solved. That, now all the emphasis is on patient care and patient implementation. And I, every once in a while, just like to fully admit that everything we are doing that has gotten us there is cream skimming. We're just skimming the cream to be able to show how we can impact patient care. But left behind in the wake is still the vast majority of fundamental biological knowledge that we need the next generation to pick up the mantle, some that are going to be doing overwhelmingly basic research that will be a bazillion miles away from clinical care. And that's okay. We need them because there's every little step along the way that we have left unanswered questions. And one of the messages I would always like to give, and I even think it applies to people doing bioinformatics, data science, AI, is you could say that's what I'm doing, but you could apply that at the most fundamental level of how a genome works or how genomic variation influences genome function, or you could use it bedside to really help implement genomic medicine. But that full spectrum of activities will continue, I'm sure, for decades to come. And anybody who wants to get into that should feel very comfortable to know that there will be opportunities across that entire spectrum, that doors are not getting shut. We are just simply trying to open as many as we can. And there's so much more knowledge to be captured.
Where do you see the biggest gap between what genomics can do today and what the healthcare system's able to absorb?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And the answer is there's just lists and lists of reasons. And what I'm learning, and maybe even learning a little bit more in the most recent 3 months at a company that is global compared to my previous 31 years in a federal government that mostly focused on the US. There's a lot of interest at NIH about how healthcare is delivered worldwide. Just getting my head around US healthcare was complicated enough, but whereas Illumina thinks more globally, there's just every possible complexity that you bump up against, and it's different at every country. But one of the things I would like to point out, because sometimes people say, genomics it's so disappointing, is you're just not getting that clinical uptake. There was all this promise. I think, again, part of the problem is you got to take a step back and just fully appreciate how new and how young all of this is. And one of the points I always like to make is the word genomics didn't even exist until 1987, which is the year I graduated medical school. And I say that because most of my medical school classmates are still practicing medicine. And I got news for you. They never heard the word genomics once in medical school because the word didn't exist. Okay, so you got to feel a little. Now I've gone off and become a genomics expert. They've been busy treating patients and now all of a sudden we thrust onto them all this new abilities in genomics, and practicing medicine is really hard. And they've got a lot of stresses and strains. They're constantly fighting with insurance companies. They're constantly dealing with a lot of regulatory issues and constantly dealing with a lot of hard problems. And then all of a sudden you throw this genomics thing. I mean, we haven't quite gotten to a point where this can be push button for them. And I'm very sympathetic. But why are we there? We're victims of our own success. If genomics would just slow down for a while, then we'd have time to train the next generation. But we've been so successfand that we've now thrust upon the current medical system a whole new set of things where they've never had any formal training. And meanwhile, they're also encountering patients who either don't understand anything about genomics, or you have patients who actually know quite a bit because they've had time to chat GPT it or to Google it. So sometimes, and I hear this from some of my medical classmates who I talk to, they walk into a patient's room, the patient's already had their genome sequenced, they've already had all these, they've had time to do it. And my poor classmate never had any training on how to deal with the data. The patient's way ahead of them. So we have a little bit of catch up to do. And some of the things I'm going to be thinking about as chief medical officer here is what do we do to think about genomic literacy enhancement for patients, for healthcare professionals. And it's not just physicians. We got to think about pharmacists and think about pharmacogenomics becoming so important. I think pharmacists can really be helpful here. Nurses, physician's assistants, genetic counselors, so on and so forth. I think there's that. Then the other example I would give is, and this is where I think it's both a challenge now, but it's also going to be part of the solution, is you don't have to go, well, let's just go back to the Genome Project completion 23 years ago. 23 years ago, there were not really electronic medical records, at least not in the United States, okay? And now everything is going to an electronic medical record. And now all of this, a lot of the way medicine is practiced is interfacing with electronic health record systems. But we have not been able to yet have seamless integration between genomic testing, genomic analyses, and then get it all fed into an electronic medical records and have it then be with the media recommendations and all these things called clinical support tools and so on and so forth. Now, so the challenge is that we haven't gotten this all together because it's all happening so fast. But the good news is these are all sort of made for one another. Genomic information is digital information. More and more medical information is digital information. More and more physicians rely on clinical decision support with pop-ups and assists and blah, blah, blah. And so when we get to the point where we can get all this designed correctly, and if only we had time to build the airplane and then fly it, but we don't because we got to build it while we're still practicing medicine, we'll eventually get to that point. But what it does require is oftentimes health systems investing in the infrastructure to get the genomic information, to get it integrated in the health records, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not necessarily going to generate money, generate revenue. It's going to be, you got to make the investment in the short term to get the long-term return. And some health systems are surging ahead and they believe it, and some are not. There's just a lot of challenges associated with that. And then meanwhile, you got to deal with the whole issue about reimbursement, who's paying for this, et cetera, et cetera. So again, what is more complicated in society than healthcare? And yet what we're trying to do is really change healthcare. It's not surprising that we're seeing a lot of challenges come up.
What does good judgment look like in a field that's moving this fast?
It depends who you ask. And it depends where you sit, right? And it is interesting, but it even speaks to issues about how when you have, nothing's unlimited, and certainly not healthcare dollars are not unlimited. There's lots of decisions that get made all the time of how do you distribute resources across an area. And the thing about genomics is that there's a lot of immediate utility, but there's a lot more long-term promise that those of us like me really believe in this, but we know it's going to be a lot of work and we don't know exactly the time. And so then what does good judgment look like? People who are running health systems, people who are making these decisions are going to have to make actuarial decisions about what problems they're trying to solve that are here and now problems versus, as the famous Gretzky quote, skating to where the puck is going to be, making the investment because you truly believe that you're going to be in a different place, that if a little bit of financial pain now will put you in a better position down the road. And I can tell you, different countries are tackling this differently for the same reason that different countries have different approaches to how they feel the government's responsibility is with respect to providing healthcare to their citizens. And the United States is not leading in genomic medicine implementation. That's just a clear fact. And a few other countries are, the UK in particular. When I was at the National Institutes of Health, we were watching and interacting and really admiring what some other countries were doing, in part because they were experiments, right? All of us are at the heart of a physician scientist. I'm an experimentalist. And so it was interesting to watch what other countries are doing. Now at Illumina, I have a slightly different set of responsibilities. And because we're global, we're partnering with some of these other countries and their health systems and trying to figure out how we could be helpful and how can we collaborate and how can we facilitate the work they want to do, because Illumina's long-term goal is to facilitate genomic medicine and precision medicine implementation worldwide.
What first pulled you into this field?
That's a great question. So my story in the field of genomics, my story is a little bit of luck, a little bit of nascent insight. And I grew up in a science family, so it wasn't totally shocking. My father was a scientist. It wasn't shocking that I gravitated towards a science undergraduate degree. I watched my older brother decide to get an MD and a PhD to become a physician scientist, and that seemed like a good decision, and it felt right to me. I really liked the idea. I knew I always wanted to do science and research, but I liked the idea of combining it with becoming a physician. But up until the point that I graduated with my MD PhD, I got a PhD in cell biology. I could barely spell DNA when I graduated medical school and graduate school because I had done my PhD in studying sugar molecules attached to proteins, these things, glycoproteins. I was very interested in how cells tried to sort their proteins to go to different places within the cell or to kick them out of the cell. And I really hadn't thought much about molecular biology or DNA science, et cetera, et cetera. And then I decided to train in clinical pathology because it was a very light clinical training because I wanted to get back to the lab as soon as possible. And at the time, there was in my internship year, before I then became a postdoc and back in a research lab, there were some early things that were called molecular diagnostic labs, where they were just starting to look at DNA rearrangements in cancer by technologies that we almost laugh at now. But I thought that seemed interesting. And then again, remember when I graduated, the word genomics was coined. There was a lot of discussion about this thing called the Human Genome Project. And my circumstance that I stayed at Washington University, where I'd gotten my MD PhD for residency because my wife was a medical student, and just so happened that Washington University had some of the leading founding folks in the field of genomics who were just leaders immediately and really helped catapult the field forward. And so I got to pick a postdoc mentor. And I looked around, I said, I haven't done anything in molecular biology or DNA science at all. And there's talk about genomics and there are these great people here. And I went to talk to one of them. And the rest is history, because I just said, wow, this just seems incredible. They were talking about maybe a Human Genome Project starting, and they would be really poised to maybe participate. And so I said, I should just build up my tool belt. I knew biochemistry. I knew, a lot about glycobiology. I knew about cell biology. I said, I should probably learn a little bit of cutting edge work in DNA science or this thing called genomics. So it was a naive idea. And then when I got into the lab and they started a year later talking about applying for becoming a center for the Human Genome Project, it just felt right. My project was right in line with what they needed to do in the Human Genome Project. And so I just said, I got all in. I just got completely mesmerized by this. I found myself suddenly working on the Human Genome Project on day one. I was a postdoc. I'm hiring technicians. Washington University was wonderful to me. They said, you should just run this because this is great. This is what you can build your career in it. And off I went. I had a vague idea. If you took me back in time to 1988, when I made the decision what I was going to do as a postdoc, I had a vague idea that you could connect the idea of having, if we really sequence the human genome, maybe the way we practice diagnostic medicine or clinical pathology, which was my clinical specialty, I could imagine some generation, 2-3 generations from now, maybe you would have genomics become part of standard diagnostic medicine. But I couldn't possibly have defined the timeline or the specific steps to get there. And maybe that's the most gratifying thing of all, is that then I got involved in the Genome Project, got recruited to join the NIH, the National Human Genome Research Institute. Still never, even you go back 23 years ago, when we finished sequencing the first human genome by the Human Genome Project, it cost $1 billion. This was still not in the realm of a clinical test that I, as a trained clinical pathologist, knew. But we called for the need at that time for reducing the cost of sequencing DNA as a key thing to follow the Human Genome Project. I was the one that helped craft a sentence in a strategic vision that NHGRI put out that talked about how we needed to get it down below $1,000 because I knew $1,000 was a good cutoff for a clinical test. Again, that sounded great at the time, 23 years ago. I said, wow, I can't wait till my grandchildren realize that. I never thought it would happen on my lifetime, my professional lifetime, let alone on my watch as NHGRI director, but all those things happen. So, and even now, I'm just continually surprised, which is how fast things move, such that the fact that I'm now existing as a CMO at a company that truly is going to help make genomic medicine a reality worldwide is pretty remarkable. And I can't take full credit for having the vision back in 1988 or whenever that what this was going to lead to, but I could see the general direction, but I just feel incredibly lucky that it's all happening in my professional lifetime.
What other choices changed your trajectory the most?
I think what other choices, when you think about it, and some choices were mine and some choices weren't always mine. One of the things I always like to tell young people is, by the way, you don't ever look at more senior people and think they had a life plan where everything was laid out. And don't even think that they even were in control of all their decisions, because a lot of things develop and some of it's just luck and some of it's personal, right? It could be what you have to do as part of your family in terms of when you can move, when you could not move. But I never saw myself going into the government. It wasn't something that occurred to me. And then one set of circumstances, I thought I was going to be an academician. I thought I'd be at a university forever. And I was an assistant professor at Washington University starting in 1992. But nobody ever saw it coming that Jim Watson, who was the first director of the Genome Institute and launched the Human Genome Project, that he would end up departing NIH unexpectedly, leaving the Human Genome Project without a leader. All of a sudden, Francis Collins gets recruited to take over the Genome Institute, and he says, I'm only going to do it if we can create a government-based genomics program it's called the Intramural Program. And all of a sudden, they say, yeah, you should do that. And Francis immediately tried to recruit a bunch of top-flight genomics researchers and genetics researchers. He called me up, and all of a sudden, in one phone call, I completely changed the trajectory of my life. I went from academia and jumped into the government, having no idea what I was getting into, but it turned out to be a wonderful opportunity. And within 2 years, I was taking on leadership roles. I took several. I was able to start a sequencing center, and then I was even able to become the director of the Institute. And then things changed for me a year ago. I retired, and I retired from federal service because I was retirement eligible after 31 years. And even then, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I was given a new chapter to explore it. My immediate gut said go back to academia, and I tried to do some of that. I explored some options. I did some consulting. I also started talking to some other organizations for consulting, and I all of a sudden was approached by Illumina, and it really was almost like instantly, oh my God, this just makes complete sense. And part of it is it wouldn't have been just that way for any company. I think it was. I'm immensely proud of my time at NHGRI, and I always say it's like the icon of genomic funders. It is the top flight one, and I feel the same way about. I've always felt the same way about Illumina. They are the icon of genomics companies. It's to me the top one. So all of a sudden, when they called me and said chief medical officer, and the way it was going to be formulated was just perfect for me and my family, it was a really easy decision. I just never saw. I never saw it coming. And if actually, and I had been out looking at jobs and really thinking through, what do I want to do? Where do I want to, how do I want to do it? And it hadn't occurred to me. And although to some extent, I was very involved in talking to lots of people, and it started through a set of conversations I had, including with the person that eventually became my boss here, the CEO. So I was open to lots of conversations. I just didn't see it all falling together until all of a sudden it just did.
I'm guessing you'll have to reach far back for this, but when in your career did you first start to think well beyond individual projects towards bigger systems?
Yeah, I think implicit in your question is just taking a very big picture view of scientific challenges. And in some ways, that was part of what I found very appealing about the Genome Project. And if I think about my graduate work, that was very traditional, although even then, most people have one PhD mentor. I had two. I just immediately saw the opportunity to cobble together that. And I also would say that even then, I really enjoyed collaborating with people. Some graduate students, some PhDs, they just like working themselves, do my project. I was always very collaborative. And then the Genome Project was all about being collaborative and all about being selfless and not worrying about, you really were part of this massive enterprise of thousands of scientists around the world. And I really want to point out, especially people don't realize that now we just take that for granted, that, now you look across biomedical research around the world, and there's still some individual labs, lots of them, and individual projects, but consortium science is very accepted, and papers with hundreds of authors, now we see that all the time. But back then it was almost frowned upon, or certainly some people just were uncomfortable with it. I can certainly tell you that even when I went out looking for jobs in 1991, when I became, not all universities were so, I literally applied and got interviewed by some universities in 1991, and they were really interested in having somebody who had some genomics expertise. It was still a very young discipline. And you'd go there and they say, what are you going to work on? And I'd say, oh, I'm going to keep working on the Human Genome Project. And they said, oh, that's like really cute, but you're working on the Genome Project. You're not going to build a career on that. What are you really going to do when you grow up? And it's like, no, I'm really going to do this. And it quickly became apparent that was not a university I wanted to go to. And I will say over the years, universities have had to decide whether or not they're comfortable having their investigators be part of these big consortium, because the Genome Project was the first of many just in genomics. But now we've seen it in neuroscience, we've seen it in microbiology, we see it all over, that for some science, consortium-based work is the way to go. And especially as science gets more complicated and more technical, you need a dream team of interdisciplinary experts. And it's like a Noah's Ark kind of a thing. You need to have two people that really know genome sequencing, two people that really know AI, two people that really know biochemistry, two people that really know physiology. This is how you move big things forward. By thinking about and it's not for everybody, but it meets my personality extremely well. And I've been thrilled and fortunate to be able to be part of consortium as the Genome Project and things like ENCODE and some other programs like that. But then in 15 years as NHGRI director, and NHGRI is the poster child of running consortium, we ran a bunch. And we even did some that were NIH-wide, even beyond our own institute, because NHGRI showed tremendous leadership for NIH Common Fund efforts like the Human Microbiome Project, like the Human Heredity and Health in Africa, H3 Africa program. This is our expertise for many years and still is. NHGRI really is the leader in how to run consortium-based science.
What did you underestimate about leadership earlier in your career?
What did I underestimate? I think I would say what I underestimated about leadership early in my career, which I always chuckle about, is that you just had no formal training in what you were being asked to do. And whether that leadership is just running your lab or running a small, like a branch or a department, or running a center, or running an entire institute, is all of that. I mean, you really think about even just running your own lab. It's like running a small business, right? You have to deal with bringing money in. You got to balance your budget. You have personnel issues. Those get complicated. You got to hire, you got to fire, you got to discipline, you got to encourage, you got to mentor. As you're not really taught much of that. And sometimes and then as you take on more and more leadership roles, the roles and responsibilities get bigger and harder. And I will tell you, when you're at the top of an organization, like the yuckier the problem, it's going to go to the top. So all of a sudden you're dealing with things you just can't even imagine you ever had to deal with. You just don't realize it until you're there. But on the other hand, what makes great leaders is, I think, and I could talk a lot about leadership, but two things I think that are absolutely essential is, one, you've got to just be completely ready to be a lifelong learner of skills. You just can't assume that you're going in and you're going to just know what you're doing. You're going to learn it because you have not been taught. But the other key aspect of it is you have to learn how to surround yourself by outstanding people. And you have to have the ability to just be very comfortable delegating to them, trusting them. And you have to develop incredibly strong relationships with your immediate folks around you, because it is a team sport. You run something like an NIH institute, it is a team sport. And when you've got a great team, you've got a great institute. And you got to cultivate that team. You got to pick them carefully. You got to nurture them. You got to mentor them. And you got to let them tell you when you're being wrong, and you got to be humble and be ready to learn and adapt. But it's critically important. You're only as good as the team that you surround yourself with.
Now for the question you know is coming. What about AI? What are your expectations for the impacts AI will have in the coming years, and the new challenges it may pose as well?
Yeah, it's the same question you could almost ask anybody on the street about society. You're just seeing it everywhere, and it's remarkable. Here's what I would say is, it's almost impossible to even claim it's impossible for me to claim I'm an expert in this, other than I can just watch what is happening. It is like everything else. It's just changing in a breathtaking way, practically measured week by week. You can just see this. What I would point out is that, not that AI isn't incredibly important in all the other ways of everyday life that it's now finding itself. I've been saying even before this incredible uptick, so I probably was saying this 5, 6, 7 years ago, it's this humbling nature of the genome that I spoke about earlier, that it is just so incredibly complicated. And the more we dig, the more we realize it's even more complicated than that. And it's so humbling. It's only 3 billion letters, and it's just amazing how much it does to create and operate a human being. And then you realize how incredibly complicated non-coding DNA is, for example. And that it's all a language issue that the human brain is just struggling getting our heads around. This just seems like the perfect marriage. It just seems like the perfect application is to bring this in, to be able to generate these massive data sets. So we're good at generating the data, we're just not good at extracting the knowledge from it. It just seems like, that it's a match made in heaven. But the other aspect of it is, it's what I've seen, in particular in the last 10, 15 years, is that it does attract the best minds. And that gives me a lot of optimism. So some of the best computational biologists, best AI experts really see this opportunity in biology. And that's just in the genome. And then, of course, if you start to pivot us into sort of the genomic medicine, precision medicine realm, you start layering into that other omic data and other data about ourselves that we capture, environmental data, physiology data, and then you marry that with electronic health records. It's this big bouillabaisse of data that sounds really great. You want to integrate, holy cow. The complexity of that data integration process is where it's not that we're going to benefit from AI. We absolutely desperately need it. We're never going to get through it without. I'd like to remind people that 23 years ago, when the Genome Project ended, I remember at NHGRI, we tried to convene a workshop because we said, hey, look at us. We're really cool. We got 3 billion letters of the human genome finally elucidated. We've got a big data issue. And I remember we tried to convene a workshop, and we invited a whole lot of some of the best computational biologists from Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, all. And we were a little disappointed that a lot of people just weren't interested. They didn't want to come to this workshop. And normally they would come to NIH workshops. And when you would talk to them, they'd say, we're really big data people. This is climate data, financial data. You don't really have that much data. And it was very humbling because we were drowning in these 3 billion letters. That's completely changed now. And I think you've seen it because the technology uptick, lots of genomic data, a lot of other omic data, and obviously electronic health. So now, the one thing, unlike 23 years ago, now the best and the brightest come and they want to work in this area because we finally got to the big data stage. Even though we thought we were there before, we weren't until now, or until recently.
What advice would you give someone early in a genomics or bioinformatics career?
I would probably have a lot of advice to give them. The first thing I would advise them, is don't worry. What I first find about young folks these days, they just worry a lot. And I see this in my own kids, and it's a generational thing. They just worry. And yet all I see is opportunities. All I see is incredible a spectrum of things to be done that are really meaningful, important problems that I am, quite hopeful there'll be great employment opportunities. And I know we hit speed bumps and some years are better than others. And I know we're in a rough period now, but I really do see this incredible set of opportunities. And I hope people don't get so worried they decide, I don't want to go into life science. I don't want to go into medicine. I don't want to go into biology, so forth. So that's the first thing. But the other thing I would say is, and part of what they're worrying about, and it was related to the story I told you earlier, is don't worry that you can't map this out for the next 20 years. Just what I constantly tell people is pick something that really gets you excited, almost to the point where you can't sleep in the morning because you just want to get back to doing what you were doing. And if you're not that excited about what you're doing, find something else to do. And if you wanted to be and I think there's much data science and AI and all those are great tools to pick up, but they're so applicable in so many different areas. Make sure you're excited about what you're working on. And if you don't, and also realize the opportunities are going to change over time and doors are going to open that you never could have anticipated. And just be enthusiastic and excited. And if you're not enthusiastic, excited, find something else. Because at the end of the day, there's plenty of opportunities. And chances are, if you have enough curiosity that you wanted to get trained in computational biology or data science, AI, and so forth, I'm sure you're going to find something you're going to get excited about.
What skills are rising in importance faster than people realize?
Well, one of the I think I'd say is one thing I get a little worried about is that especially around my younger people, is the pandemic was very isolating, and now there's a lot of abilities to do remote work and to be very isolating professionally. And I think one of the skills that and I'm allowed to worry a little, I don't worry a lot, but one of the things I worry a little bit about, and maybe if in the terms of advice, is don't get too comfortable just being isolated and feeling like I'm just doing a lot. I actually think one of the really important things that are underappreciated is interacting in person with people. Maybe not every day, maybe not, but just recognizing that human interaction, especially in the pursuit of advances in science or in medicine, that human interactions are really important. Some of them could be fine virtually, but they can't all be fine virtually. And I just want to make sure that the mixing bowl of strategizing, discussing, debating, interacting, and developing a relationship, I think is so important, all this. One of the things, and I say this all the time, I think a lot of people who are not scientists think that science is a very asocial profession. They think of the scientist at the bench just pipetting and thinking great thoughts and writing great papers. Science is one of the most social things I know. And my career, throughout has been overwhelmingly benefited by interactions. And then at the extreme, interactions at the consortium level, where you're interacting with people all around the world. And I'm just worried about the recent trend of the pandemic and isolating and the ability to exist virtually and interact virtually. It may take a little of the momentum away from what I think is one of the beneficial parts of science, which is being a highly social endeavor. And so I just would caution people about thinking the perfect job is one where they never have to interact with people, because I think that the interaction is really important, including in-person interaction.
So on that note, what do you find makes a mentor relationship most useful?
The mentor-mentee relationship most useful? I think it's one, having the mentee's interest in mind and not let anything be cookie cutter. And what I always tell people, I mentor lots of people in lots of ways. Even today, I'm still mentoring lots of people. I can tell you on my calendar this week, there's like 2 or 3 meetings I'm having mentoring folks, who are late in their career, middle of their career, early in their career. Being mentored is a lifelong endeavor. I'm still getting mentored. I got news for you. When I became the CMO, I'm in a whole new world. I've been having conversations with some of my lifelong mentors just because I think bouncing ideas off of them. But it's not cookie cutter. And the other thing is, the most important thing for a mentor to realize is their goal is not to replicate themselves in the mentee and make a me. They're to help guide a person let them be who they are. And even if they're radically different. In fact, what I always tell people when I give them advice is you should have role models and you should have anti-role models. And even your role models, there may be half the things that you want to emulate in your role model and half the things absolutely not emulate in your role model. You should pick and choose and feel what's comfortable for you and pursue that. So I just think it's sort of an open-mindedness that you can't, and I think if a mentor is way too much about, I'm trying to make widget and this is the parameters of that widget, that's just the wrong approach to mentoring as far as I'm concerned.
What question do you wish people ask more often?
What question do I wish that, you mean like when they're entering their career?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish people would ask or just maybe they like it when questions are about how you got to where you are. I would, as opposed to, because what I sometimes find that's humor is they're going through the process. They're so fixated on asking questions like, take a third semester of calculus. Should I take physical chemistry or not take physical chemistry? Especially those who are really trying to get into competitive programs, either medical school or PhD. And I just think some of those are sort of the wrong question. And I just wish they would ask more people about their journeys so that they realize that everybody's journey is different and that they shouldn't try to put themselves in a trajectory that is well-defined, because there's no such thing as a single route to get to a destination.
And to wrap up, what are you most excited to learn next?
To be honest with you, maybe the answer I would give is what I am most excited to learn next is how I can be impactful in a whole new setting, but one that is focused on the same goals that I had in the previous 3 decades. And what I mean by that is I feel so fortunate by having the career that I had at the National Human Genome Research Institute. And the laser focus, if I had to summarize what we were trying to accomplish, especially me as the director, was, can we make genomics truly improve the practice of medicine? And I am now in a completely different role and a completely different part of the ecosystem. And yet we're trying to do the same exact thing. And so what I am most excited about and what I really most want to learn is, what can I do to help Illumina in their role in the ecosystem truly see genomic medicine and precision medicine become a reality?
Eric, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. It's been a great conversation and good to see you.
The Bioinformatics CRO provides computational biology services to academics, research institutions, biotechs, and pharmaceutical companies on a flexible hourly basis. Visit our website, bioinformaticscro.com, to learn more.